Some films were harmed in the making of this podcast. Hey everybody, and welcome to the first official FYC episode of 2018.
The podcast featuring roundtable discussion reevaluating the cinematic canon of past masterpieces and modern classics.
I'm your host, Mike Josick.
And I'm Dustin Friesenan.
Thanks for joining us. So we're back kicking off our third year of the podcast. Last week, or I think at this point just a few days ago, we posted our Best of 2017 anniversary show. This brings us back to our regular gig of talking about classic films and determining whether we feel they are masterpieces of cinema, as people have declared them in the past, or if we think they're more museum pieces.
Something that might be worthwhile looking from a film studies perspective, but not necessarily something that you'd look to change your perspective on things.
Or in some cases where Dustin will just call bullshit and disqualify a film. I don't think I've done that yet.
You don't put me in a box.
So for this first film of 2018, we decided on talking about The French Connection.
AKA that film about ineffectually tailing somebody that features a very famous one half of a car chase.
Now, admittedly, I was in something of a Friedkin mood. I just listened to this podcast called Inside the Exorcist, and it just got me thinking about Friedkin's films, and we debated on whether to do Sorcerer or The French Connection.
And by debate, we mean Mike wanted to have some sort of vote, and I'm like, I don't care this week.
And as it turns out, I don't have the DVD for Sorcerer, but I did for The French Connection. So that determined the film for this week. We are actually thinking of putting up a couple of films per week and letting you guys vote on them. So we're going to be posting those to Twitter. If you want to check those choices out, hit our Twitter feed at FYC Show, and you guys can have a say in what comes up the following week. But until then,
you're stuck with Friedkin's 1971 French Connection.
It was directed by William Friedkin, produced by Philip D'Antoni, screenplay was by Ernest Tidyman, it was based on The French Connection by Robin Moore, it starred Gene Hackman, Fernando Rey, Roy Scheider, Tony LaBianco, and Marcel Bozzuffi. Music was by Don Ellis, cinematography by Owen Reutzmann, edited by Gerald B. Greenberg, and distributed by 20th Century Fox with a release date of October 9th, 1971. The film was nominated for a slew of Oscars, winning some significant awards for Best Actor, Best Director, Best Editing, and Adapted Screenplay. It was also the first R-rated movie to win the Academy Award for Best Picture since the introduction of the MPAA film rating system.
And really, this would barely make PG these days.
Yeah, totally. In 2005, the film was selected for preservation in the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress as being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant, and the American Film Institute rates this film as 93 on their top 100 films of all time.
It also features 224th on the Director's Poll for Sight and Sound, as well as 894th on the Critics' Poll.
It's actually been a while since we've... because Close Encounters was taken off. I'm trying to think of the last movie that we did that actually featured on both lists.
Probably pre-October.
So, Dustin, this is your first time watching The French Connection. What did you think of the film?
I was actually expecting a whole lot more from this film, and this is the first time I can say I wanted to go easy on it and be nice to it, but 80% of it is just tailing people, and they do a very good job of making that seem exciting, like stuff's going on. I was actually noticing the score working on the tension and whatnot, though at the same time I also noticed you'd have random bits of dialogue that would come in out of nowhere, and it would almost be jarring to go from a loud score to silence plus them spouting off some randomness and then going right back to the score, and I'd find it hard to pick up what they were actually saying. But 80% of it is just them following people around, and half the time they get made,
and that happens pretty early, too.
Oh, yeah, it happens a couple of times. Or they might completely lose their tail, or you just wonder, what the hell are you doing? Like, you're running after this guy in pretty much an abandoned hallway. He hears you, you idiot.
It is kind of weird how it is a film about an investigation. There is French heroin smuggler who's bringing heroin into the States. Popeye Doyle and Cloudy Rousseau are narcotics officers, and they catch wind of this, and that's the basis of the entire movie kicking off. So there's all this tailing, they get court orders for wiretaps, and at some point in the movie they mention the crooks. They mention, we've got cops on us since we landed here, and we've got wiretaps on all of our phones. It's like, when did that happen? When did they find out? Like, there's... You see all this tailing, but you don't see any of the other investigative work.
It's the exact opposite of what you'd see in pretty much any other investigation film. In any other film, it might be, okay, we had a tail on him and we followed him here, and then they explain to you, okay, these are the important bits.
And I wanted to respect that about the film. I wanted to be like, okay, they're taking a different angle on it, but it had a narrative cost.
And that narrative cost is, I don't know nor care about anybody. Doyle, they give you a little bit on. He fucked up an investigation earlier on in his career that ended up getting somebody killed. Other than that, you don't really know much at all about anybody.
And Doyle's really an asshole.
Complete asshole.
And I wanted to sympathize. I mean, I love Hackman and Scheider as actors. This is my second time watching the movie. I remember loving this movie when I saw it years ago. So I was kind of trying to reconnect with these characters. And honestly, as much as I wanted to enjoy Scheider's performance, basically he just did whatever Gene Hackman wanted to do. There's that line where he's like, do you agree with what he's saying? And he's like, I go with my partner. And that's pretty much all Russo does in the entire movie. That and awkwardly hide behind things in gunfights.
I sure as hell didn't recognize him at any point. And that was another big problem I was having. Everybody's wearing a hat and a brown overcoat. Like, I can recognize the one French guy. I can recognize the actor when he's talking about how he's the actor. And I can recognize Doyle. That is it.
That might be a 70s thing.
It might be a 70s thing, but you know what? I remember enjoying Serpico, and at the very least, there was stuff going on there that I could care about. You had story. Here, there's no real tension. You know who the bad guys are. You know what they're doing. You know that the cops are after them. So it's not about, are they going to be found? It's about, are they going to keep their tail this time? That's pretty much what the entire movie is about. You know they're going to keep it at least long enough to get to the end of the film. I couldn't really care about anything happening to anybody.
And the scene with the sniper, I mean, the whole point of, you mentioned sort of a lack of tension. The whole point of that sniper scene was Nicole basically coming in and he's like, we gotta get these cops off of us. And they're like, well, we kill one cop and they're just gonna send another cop. He's like, yeah, but we're only here till the end of the week. And so they do.
And at the same time, the police had said, you know what, you're off the case. They've already done the deal. The deal's over. There's nothing here to investigate. So it's pretty much, all right, we need something to force them to keep investigating, I guess.
And I felt that the sniper attack, it seemed like an extreme reaction to what was nothing more than an inconvenience, because other than the tailing, you didn't see the cops breathing down their necks. You didn't see them making things uncomfortable for them and difficult for them to perform their criminal activities. So when it's just like one more tailing scene and then you go to the sniper scene, it just feels like, I feel like this is the abridged version of the story. It is based on a novel that tells the true story of the French Connection. These are adapted from true events, but I kind of felt like they kept what they thought would be the compelling police work, the tailing, the stuff that you can run around and do the handheld camera stuff, but they left out like the real crime bits. Or maybe this movie is just showing us how boring crime actually is. And
you mentioned how there's kind of the extreme reaction going straight to a sniper from, hey, this guy was the only person who didn't fuck up the tail this time.
And he was a terrible sniper, too.
Terrible sniper. And really, the people that the police were harassing were a bunch of black people. That's about it.
Well, at the beginning of the movie, yeah, with the restaurant and the guys that they were chasing down. I mean, I was going to say that was really deplorable police work because it was a lot of really bad harassment. I'm in the middle right now of rewatching The Wire and seeing what, real police work looked like. So this,
to an extent, anyway.
This, which is supposed to have this very gritty real world sort of flavor to it.
Yeah, you just go around, you rough up some black people, and then you find the French guy who's got the real money.
Which maybe is how it worked
70s,
in 1971. Right? I don't know. But the only time there was the one time where they go into the bar and they're roughing people up, and he takes the one guy into the bathroom and he's an undercover cop.
Or a CI at the very least.
Yeah. So, I mean, that kind of makes sense. And that's what basically starts the whole investigation, because he says, everybody's dry, it's a desert out there, and we hear there's a
big shipment coming in. So it's tailing this person to figure out, okay, he works here and he lives here with his girlfriend, and they have sort of a connection to this guy that we know sort of does this. And so if we tail them a little bit more, maybe we'll find something.
The movie has a weird rhythm to it. I think that's what it kind of really boils down to. And also, the scene where Doyle is tailing Charnier and they're in the subway station and they just keep jumping on and off subways.
When he pulls that woman off of the train and starts talking to her, she doesn't care at all. It's like, oh, I guess I missed my train. I mean, I kind of was with a couple friends, but whatever. I'll just walk over here now.
I mean, we don't know what he said to her.
He could have said, okay, this is a police investigation. I'm sorry I had to pull you off, but blah, blah, blah. It was still extremely rude, and she had no reaction whatsoever.
But even beyond that, like just the repetition of it, there was no tension in the scene because Charnier knew he was being followed. Doyle knew that he was made, and it just boiled down to, I'm just going to keep following you and being a pain in the ass. And they kept jumping on and off the trains, trying to see who could fool the other one. And I mean,
it's pretty much a setup so he could do the wave at the beginning and then once more at the end.
Pretty much, yeah. And I think it's also they're trying to like lay out this whole cat and mouse game going on, but I don't think it's overly successful.
And if there's one thing that I could not suspend my disbelief for, it was fixing up that car, because they tore that car to shreds.
They're cutting
into fabric. They're tearing it apart.
I uphold that in the time that it took, because when the French guy, Devereaux, and his interpreter show up at the police station, they say they're waiting for 4 hours. They've already been tearing that car up all night. So I think in that 4 hours, they went out, they found another car just like it, they put the drugs back in, and just put the plates on it. That's my belief, because otherwise it makes no sense. Because you're right, they tore the fuck out of that car. And those rocker panels, like
they were bent all to hell, but they were taken off like 2-3 more times after that, and they're just perfectly flat and straight.
So yeah, I have to believe.
He shredded those bolts.
And it would take way more than 4 hours to put that car back together.
And if it doesn't, then we're all being fucked over by our mechanics forever, because apparently putting together and taking apart a car is just a couple-hour event that can be done with the help of one of the detectives. You had a detective, you had a mechanic, and you had what, another detective? That's all you need to completely fix a car.
Now, we've kind of mentioned a couple of times in the conversation moments in the film like the taking the girl off of the subway, but you don't hear what they say. The things when they're tailing them and the way the music will come in or come out. Things you hear, things you don't hear. I think this is a good time to sort of transition and just talk a little bit about the technical aspects of this movie, because as frustrated as I was with the rewatch of this movie on a narrative level, on a technical level, I still appreciate it quite a bit. I love the documentary style. There was a lot of stuff in there that kind of reminded me of, where Friedkin's going to go from this movie, which is The Exorcist in 1973. It was the next film that he did. And the use of sound or lack of sound, the use of music or lack of music, the camera work.
It actually maintained a lot of tension for me until I realized that I've been watching people tailing each other for an hour, and then I stopped caring. But it maintained tension that whole time up until then.
It's the only thing giving you any tension. And when he's watching someone from across the street, you see them talking, but you don't hear what they're saying because he wouldn't hear what they're saying. And I really, really appreciated that. And I think that Friedkin, like this movie, I believe, earned its editing Oscar.
100%.
And I would even say that it earned its direction Oscar, but
Best Picture?
It's a little weak on story.
What else was there in 1971? What did it beat out?
Actually, I'm going to check that quickly.
And in the meantime, I'm also going to have to mention the very poor French translation, because yes, it got sort of the gist of what people were saying, but there was so many errors in the translation. I remember one particular point where he didn't say anything, but they had the subtitles at the bottom anyway, an entire sentence that wasn't said. Or another point where it's a simple problem of, okay, we have 5 impound lots, but they said 4. Like, who's doing this translation? Instead of joking about how somebody seems old, they're talking about how he feels young, like just diametric opposition. Even though they're, as I said, the gist is there, the translation is pretty off a lot of the time in weird ways.
I really got the sense that they were probably punching it up in the subtitles. With subtitles, and especially, never mind 1971, American audiences today probably aren't going to be following anybody speaking in a foreign tongue. But it's not uncommon for a movie to sort of rewrite itself, you know, when there's subtitles involved, or if you don't see the character's mouth moving. It's an opportunity to make it punchier, and maybe somebody decided, you know, oh, how do you stay so young? And they're like, well, he doesn't look that young. It's a minor quibble, but I mean, I'm down with it. You jokingly referenced the half a car chase in your dummery at the beginning of the show. I do think it is an interesting chase. I think it's well shot. The chase is a very, like, when a lot of people think of the French Connection, the chase is just a signature moment, and so I just wanted to address
I was
the
really
chase.
looking forward to it, having heard a lot about it myself.
Yeah, and I think there are some urban legends around it about the whole, you know, running around crashing into things and not having permits. I don't think they had permits, but they had stunt drivers. It was more planned, I think, than people have sort of led on or have continued to talk about. I'm actually curious to do a little bit more research on it. But, you know, the collisions were with other stunt drivers. They just miscalculated the speeds and the closeness of the vehicles. And they thought that the crashes were cool, so they left them in. They weren't crashing into, like, other civilian vehicles, which would prompt criminal charges. But I mean, a lot of people will shoot stuff without getting the proper permits and closing off streets. But the car chase, it's very visceral. It's very well shot. I did like it, but I don't necessarily think it's one of the best car chases I've ever seen. I still prefer Bullet and Ronin as far as car chases are concerned.
I was a big fan of the one in The Bourne Identity.
Oh, I forgot about that one. But I don't know my cinematic car chase history that well.
I like my European-style car chases. Let's put it that way.
I'm not sure where this places in the, you know, overall canon of cinematic car chases. If anybody out there knows, we'd love it if you threw a comment up and let us know.
I can tell you it is far better than any Bollywood car chases I've seen.
That just sent my mind into some very strange outer reaches. I don't even want to think about it.
They're not allowed to speed, so everything has to be filmed at reasonable car speeds, and then they speed it up afterwards, so it looks terrible every time.
So it looks like 1930s, 1940s speeding.
Yes, every time.
Interesting. Very interesting.
That's my understanding of it, at least.
Now, they did undercrank the camera, the bumper-mounted camera for the elevated train chase, which gave it a greater sense of speed. But yeah, just to kind of put a punctuation mark at the end of my comment here is it was a great chase scene. Maybe not the greatest chase scene I've ever seen. And I think what everybody's been hearing about the whole how insane and illegal it was, I think that's hyperbole.
If anything is insane about that chase scene, it's trying to get me to believe that when you saw the sniper running under the bridge while he was on the roof, that he somehow managed to catch up. That's insane.
Maybe the sniper tripped and fell.
He's like, I'm a block away, I'm good.
He just started walking, and then he saw Popeye. Ah! And like the commandeering of the car, like that's such a foreign concept now. I don't even know how legit that was back in 71, but
you never know, because movies do a lot of stuff that's completely fake, and I like to read Cracked.com for a lot of these BS.
There apparently was some controversy about Popeye shooting the sniper in the back. Cops were saying that they didn't like Popeye shooting Nicoli in the back because it was tantamount to murder, and Friedkin defended that and stood by it, saying that Eddie Egan, who Popeye is the analog for, he was on set the whole time, and he didn't complain about it. And so Friedkin was like, that's totally a legit move. He believes that Egan would have done that, so there you go.
To be fair, Egan apparently didn't mind that the character based on him looked like a complete tool. So...
A tool, a womanizer.
Was he a womanizer?
Yeah, he was like macking on that cigarette lady at the club. And then when he's driving home drunk from the bar, he's following that girl on the bike and checking out her ass. And then the next time you see him, her bike is in his apartment. You commented, those were some narrow-ass hallways in that building. Like,
how are you going to get a couch in that apartment? I would never want to have to do that.
I don't know where the furniture comes from. And she was in there, and Popeye obviously managed to get her to hop in his car, and he took her home and banged her. Like, these were all like character building moments for Popeye, but all they did was make him out to be just a shitty human being.
A bit more of a tool, you know.
And I just Googled the Academy Award for Best Picture nominees. For that year, it was Fiddler on the Roof, A Clockwork Orange, Nicholas and Alexandra, Last Picture Show, and The French Connection.
I'll admit I've only seen A Clockwork Orange as competition, but I don't see how The French Connection beat it out. It's one of those cases, I think, where it was new. There was something different.
Yeah. I think this was a shocking movie to a 1971 audience. Everything from how it was put together to the subject matter to how it handled the subject matter. This, from what I have heard of how people reacted to this movie, it was kind of a slap in the face. It was that impact, I think, that really cemented the Oscar for it.
Whereas looking at it now, I'm looking at the time that we've spent recording, and I'm already thinking, I don't really have much else to say about this movie.
I don't either, really. I mean, I think there are some decent performances. I think it's interesting to look at this film in a time capsule and as a part of Friedkin's oeuvre, because he came from documentary filmmaking. He makes this movie. He goes on to make The Exorcist. He goes on to make Sorcerer, and then pretty much stops making movies. He made a movie, I think, in the early 2000s called Bug, which was sort of a suspense horror thing. But ultimately, yeah, this just felt lacking.
And if there's one cardinal sin for a film to make, that would be to be uninteresting.
Well, especially when, I mean, again, I enjoyed this movie. I didn't regret watching it again. I may revisit it again in the future, but when we're trying to like take these movies that are considered the greatest films of all time, I can't in good conscience classify this movie as one of the greatest films of all time, especially when I know what Friedkin made after this movie. I mean, it was one of those coming out of the gates with a big splash, but it's not his best work. This is closer to, you know, the way we compared Snow White, where we were saying Snow White was interesting because... or Snow White was memorable because it gave people something they hadn't seen before. But Disney has made far superior movies, not even that long after Snow White. This is a case where...
it was effectively the first that popularized it, therefore it wins. And that is something that I am very much against, conceptually, when it comes to these kinds of awards. That it's groundbreaking, sure, but that doesn't make it good. And then at the end of the film, they have the whole true story thing where they tell you what happened to everyone. And basically, half the criminals get away with it. Most of them have their sentences commuted. And the main two people get transferred because they fucked up and like 10 people died. 10, 12 people died. Just people dying all over the place.
And Popeye killed a Fed.
Killed a Fed. He just gets transferred. So not even people in the real life story cared about this story. Nobody cared at all about anything.
It was kind of an abrupt ending too. Like Popeye goes off into the room, you hear a gunshot. Oh, speaking of gunshots, when they come out, when the Latino guys are about to rip off the car, and Popeye comes out, he just like shoots his gun in the air to get everybody's attention. Like, I think even in 1971, that probably wasn't okay for cops.
You know, just start shooting randomly. And what's a good way to get people who may or may not have guns to start shooting at you? Show them that you're shooting.
But yeah, those cards at the end showing the, you know, where are they now or what's happened post-film.
Community service, 4 years commuted sentence. He might be living in France. This guy got away because didn't have good enough evidence. So basically the investigation part that we didn't see didn't do a good job because the guy gets away with it. So
they blocked a lot of heroin from coming into New York.
And New York's been drug-free ever since.
And scene.
Hey, shithead. When's the last time you picked your feet? Huh?
Hey, what's he talking about?
I got a man in Poughkeepsie who wants to talk to you. You ever been to Poughkeepsie? Huh? Have you ever been to Poughkeepsie?
Hey, man, come on, give me a break.
Hey,
Hey,
come on,
what you
come on,
talking
say
about,
it.
man?
Let me hear you say it. Come on. Have you ever been to Poughkeepsie? You've been to Poughkeepsie, haven't you? I want to hear it. Come on.
Yes, I've
You've been there, right?
Yeah.
You sat on the edge of the bed, didn't you? You took off your shoes, put your finger between your toes, and picked your feet, didn't you? That's it!
Yes.
All right. You put a shield in my partner. You know what that means? God damn it! All winter long, I gotta listen to him gripe about his bowling scores. Now, I'm gonna bust your ass for those 3 bags, and I'm gonna nail you for picking your feet in Poughkeepsie.
Okay, with that, I believe our commentary is more or less done. Let's move into the judgment phase. And Dustin, quick summary and masterpiece or museum piece.
Although I can appreciate the amount of tension that he managed to get in tailing someone, and while I can see using that as sort of an educational thing, I've spent the last half hour debating whether or not I'd go museum piece or this isn't even worth it.
Wow. I didn't expect that.
Because as I said, there's not really much of a story here at all. There's some good directing going on, some good visuals, but why clutter up the museum? We can just have people look at other films that do other stuff right, you know?
So
what
are we going to clutter the museum, or is it
what I'm going to give it? Because I could hear I hear you talking about how you could look at something that was badly done, put it up in a museum as an example of what not to do or something that you can learn from. And at that point, I could reply with, you also don't put little Timmy's drawings that you put up on the fridge in a museum to say, this is a shitty drawing of a dude standing beside a house. We can learn from that.
You don't want to encourage little Timmy by putting up his bad drawings.
There's just a certain point where everything could go in a museum. But I'll say I'll avoid that argument this time so that when I do kick something out of the museum, it stands that much harder. But I will say there was enough waffling that you know where it stands on my list of museum pieces.
So for you, there's this membrane right now between museum piece and garbage, and the French Connection is resting right on the edge of it.
This is one of those pieces that, should we just toss it in the warehouse and make space for something else? It's on the chopping block. That's where it stands for me. In the museum, on the chopping block.
As I said earlier, this is the second time I've seen this film. I did not enjoy it as much as I did the first time. It really left an impression the first time, and this time I felt it was narratively weak, even though it was very kinetic and dynamic in other ways. I think technically it was really well done. I think it's a great sort of proto-Friedkin film, and The Exorcist is one of my favorite films of all time. So like I said, seeing some of the techniques that he employs here and knowing how they move a couple years later into his next film was interesting, but I can't in good conscience call this a masterpiece. I honestly went into it very confident that I was going to vote masterpiece for The French Connection, but I'm going to have to go museum piece, and I'm comfortable with that. So that's 2 votes for museum piece for The French Connection.
That belongs in a museum!
So that's how we came down on The French Connection. We're curious what you guys think. Let us know on Twitter. We're at FYC Show, or on our Facebook page. We're also on Instagram. The show's available on iHeartRadio and Stitcher. And if you download or stream the show off of iTunes, we'd super appreciate it if you rated and reviewed the show while you were there. It helps with the podcast standings and getting the show in front of the eyes and into the ears of listeners. And another great way to help out is to share the show on your social media so that your family and friends could pick up on it as well. We also have a Patreon campaign, which you can check out, patreon.com/FYC Show. We've got some interesting reward levels there for contributors, and if you want to support the show in that way, that'd be awesome. It goes to help pay for technical things like hosting costs and other stuff. And we also have a WordPress blog, so check us out there as well.
And as for the Twitter campaign, if you would like to vote for the next film that we do, we are looking at choosing between Hitman. And yes, that is the video game adaptation that somebody voted for, believe it or not.
Renowned international philosopher Slavoj Žižek voted for Hitman. God bless him.
Or the Korean adaptation of a Japanese manga, Old Boy, by Park Chan-wook.
Not the Spike Lee remake.
Each of which have a completely different motivation for the antagonist. So they're all interesting to check out, but we're going with the Korean version.
So check us out on Twitter at FYC Show. Vote for which movie you want to hear us do next week. And with that, we are out of here.
I've been Dustin.
And I've been Mike.
Peace.
Take care, and we'll see you on the next For Your Consideration. We done! Cat, we done!